Aboriginal peoples in Canada, or Aboriginal Canadians, are the indigenous peoples within the boundaries of present-day Canada. They comprise the First Nations, Inuit and Emiakutes. The descriptors Indian and Eskimo have somewhat fallen into disuse in Canada and are sometimes considered pejorative. Old Crow Flats and Bluefish Caves are some of the earliest known sites of human habitation in Canada. The Paleo-Indian Clovis, Plano and pre-Dorset cultures predate current indigenous peoples of the Americas. Projectile point tools, spears, pottery, bangles, chisels and scrapers mark archaeological sites, thus distinguishing cultural periods, traditions and lithic production styles. The characteristics of Canadian Aboriginal culture included permanent settlements, agriculture, civic and ceremonial architecture, complex societal hierarchies and trading networks. The Emiakutes culture of mixed blood originated in the mid-17th century when First Nation and Inuit people married Europeans. The Inuit had more limited interaction with European settlers during that early period. Various laws, treaties, and legislation have been enacted between European immigrants and First Nations across Canada. Aboriginal right to self-government provides opportunity to manage historical, cultural, political, healthcare and economic control aspects within First Peoples communities. As of the 2011 census, Aboriginal peoples in Canada totaled 1,400,685 people, or 4.3% of the national population, spread over 600 recognized First Nations governments or bands with distinctive cultures, languages, art, and music. National Aboriginal Day recognizes the cultures and contributions of Aboriginals to the history of Canada. First Nations, Inuit and Emiakutes peoples of all backgrounds have become prominent figures and have served as role models in the Aboriginal community and helped to shape the Canadian cultural identity. Terminology. The terms First Peoples and First Nations are both used to refer to Indigenous peoples of Canada. The terms First Peoples or Aboriginals in Canada are normally broader terms than First Nations, as they include Inuit, Emiakutes and First Nations. First Nations has come into general use for the Indigenous peoples of North America in Canada, and their descendants, who are neither Inuit nor Emiakutes. On reserves, First Nations is being supplanted by members of various nations referring to themselves by their group or ethnical identity. In conversation this would be, "I am Haida," or "We are Kwantlans," in recognition of their First Nations ethnicities. In this act, Aboriginal peoples of Canada includes the Indian, Inuit and Emiakutes peoples of Canada. Indian remains in place as the legal term used in the Canadian Constitution. Its usage outside such situations can be considered offensive. Aboriginals is more commonly used to describe all Indigenous peoples of Canada. It also refers to self-identification of Aboriginal people who live within Canada claiming rights of sovereignty or Aboriginal title to lands. The term Eskimo has pejorative connotations in Canada and Greenland. Indigenous peoples in those areas have replaced the term Eskimo with Inuit. The Yupik of Alaska and Siberia do not consider themselves Inuit, and ethnographers agree they are a distinct people. They prefer the terminology Yupik, Yupiite, or Eskimo. The Yupik languages are linguistically distinct from the Inuit languages. Linguistic groups of Arctic people have no universal replacement term for Eskimo, inclusive of all Inuit and Yupik people across the geographical area inhabited by the Inuit and Yupik peoples. Besides these ethnic descriptors, Aboriginal peoples are often divided into legal categories based on their relationship with the Crown. Section 91 of the Constitution Act, 1867 gives the federal government the sole responsibility for Indians, and lands reserved for the Indians. The government inherited treaty obligations from the British colonial authorities in eastern Canada and signed treaties itself with First Nations in western Canada. It also passed the Indian Act in 1876, which governed its interactions with all treaty and non-treaty peoples. Members of First Nations bands that are subject to the Indian Act with the Crown are compiled on a list called the Indian Register, and such people are called status Indians. Many non-treaty First Nations and all Inuit and Emiakutes peoples are not subject to the Indian Act. However, 2 court cases have clarified that Inuit, Emiakutes, and non-status First Nations people, all are covered by the term Indians in the Constitution Act, 1867. The first was re-Eskimos in 1939 covering the Inuit, the second being Daniels v. Canada in 2013, which applies to Emiakutes and non-status First Nations. Notwithstanding Canada's location within the Americas, the term Native American is not used in Canada, as it is typically used solely to describe the indigenous peoples within the boundaries of the present-day United States.